More Stories from Grandma's Attic by Arletta Richardson. Illustrated by Dora Letter. Chapter 9. Grandma's Day Off. "Would you set the table for me, please?" Grandma asked as she was getting dinner ready. "I don't want to," I replied. Grandma looked at me in surprise. "You what?" "I don't want to," I said, a little less bravely this time. "I don't believe I asked if you wanted to. I asked if you would." While I placed the knives and forks around the table, I muttered, "Molly Stone never has to do anything she doesn't want to." Grandma looked at me thoughtfully. "I'm not sure that's always true. Having stuff to do makes you part of the family. You'd be unhappy if you never had to work." I'd like to try it sometime, I thought. Grandma seemed to have read my mind, for suddenly she laughed. "I wanted to try that once. I thought I was expected to do entirely too much around home, and that if I didn't have all my chores to do, I'd be perfectly happy." "Did your mother let you try it?" "Yes, she did," Grandma replied. "And I'll tell you how it turned out after dinner." When we had finished the dishes, Grandma sat down with her sewing and I pulled my chair up beside her. It was in the summer I was 9 years old. Ma was very busy taking care of the garden, canning the early vegetables, and cooking for the hired men Pa had working on the farm. My job was to make the beds, help with the dishes, sweep the floors and dust, feed the chickens, and bring the cows in from the pasture in the evening. Actually, those chores didn't take a lot of time if I got right at them, but I grumbled and fussed until my work seemed to use up the day. One morning, Ma became impatient with my complaining. "You seem to forget that you're not the only one in the family who has work to do," she reminded me. "Pa and the boys aren't out in the fields playing ball, you know. Where would you be if no one in the family did any work for you?" "I'd probably get along fine," I replied grumpily. "I could take care of myself if I didn't have all these other jobs to do." Ma eyed me carefully for a moment. "All right, we'll try and see. You finish up your work for today, and beginning tomorrow morning, you may do whatever you like. The rest of us will take over your chores." "Do you really mean it, Ma?" I exclaimed. "I don't have to do anything except what I want to?" "I mean it. But remember, no one will do anything for you either. That will be your responsibility." I couldn't believe my good fortune, to actually be free to spend my time in any way I chose. I began to plan all the things I would do in the glorious days ahead. That night at supper, Pa regarded me thoughtfully. "I hear you're going to be a lady of independence." "What does that mean, Pa?" I asked. "It means you're going to take care of yourself and be your own boss." I nodded happily. "Ma said I could do whatever I want, and no chores to finish first." Roy opened his mouth to say something, but a look from Pa stopped him. The following morning, I awakened to the sound of voices in the kitchen. For a moment, I wondered why Ma had not called me. Then I remembered this was my day. I could sleep half the morning if I wanted to. Suddenly, I didn't want to. The whole exciting day stretched before me, and I needed to get an early start. I jumped out of bed and reached for my clothes. They were not there. The dress and the apron I had taken off the night before lay on the floor where I had dropped them, but there were no clean things on the chair where Ma always placed them. I started to call her to come and help me, then decided against it. I could certainly get my own clothes out. I dressed as quickly as I could and ran to the kitchen. To my surprise, the table was cleared and Ma was doing the dishes. "Where's my breakfast?" I asked. Ma didn't turn around. "That's your responsibility. You go ahead and get what you want." That slowed me down a little. I hadn't counted on having to fix my meals. I could see that the family had eaten pancakes and ham and eggs. But that was hard for me to fix, especially since the pancake batter seemed to be all gone. I finally managed to cut a piece of bread and put jam on it. The heavy milk pitcher was too much for me to handle. Milk spilled out on the table and floor. "That's too bad," Ma said. "You know where the mop and bucket are, don't you?" "Aren't you going to help me?" "Why, no. You can take care of yourself." When I had cleaned up the mess as best as I could, I sat down at the table. A piece of bread and jam and no one to eat with seemed a poor way to start the day. "I sure don't like to eat alone," I muttered. "I'm sorry," Ma said, "but I thought since you had no chores today you'd rather sleep in than get up when we did." This reminder of the good times ahead brightened my outlook somewhat, so I finished quickly and hurried outside. The day was bright and beautiful, and I skipped happily across the yard. Immediately I was surrounded by chickens. "Oh, bother! You'll just have to wait. Ma will feed you as soon as she has time." It seemed to me that they watched reproachfully as I ran toward the brook. "It won't hurt 'em to wait a few minutes," I thought. "This is my day." For a while I was happy picking flowers and wading in the brook. I made a daisy chain to hang around my neck, then lay on my stomach to see myself in the water. After what seemed like a long time, I looked up at the sun and saw that it was still only the middle of the morning. Time didn't go so fast when there was no one to play with. I thought of Ma doing the dishes alone and making all the beds and began to feel a little bit guilty. "But after all," I thought, "she did say I could do what I wanted to." And that's what I was doing. That morning went slower than any I had ever known. I was determined not to miss the dinner bell, so when it seemed close to noon, I started back to the house. I wasn't late, but another surprise awaited me. The table was set for dinner, but at my place there was nothing but breadcrumbs and a knife with jam on it. Ma turned and smiled at me. "Did you have a nice morning?" "Yes, ma'am, but don't I get to eat with you this noon?" "Oh, my, yes," Ma replied. "Just clear away your breakfast things and set your place." I did, but my ideas about freedom were beginning to change. "Shall I help you put the food on?" I asked. Ma looked surprised. "No, thank you. Just sit down and we'll be ready to eat in a few minutes." I sat down at the table and watched Ma dish up the food. Something was just not right about this arrangement, and it made me feel uneasy. But I decided not to let the boys know how disappointing it was. When they and Pa came in for dinner, I attempted to look happier than I felt.
"Well,"
Pa boomed as he sat down at the table,
"do we have a visitor here today?"
"I'm not a visitor, Pa," I said. "I live here."
"Of course. How could I forget that?" "I'd like to forget it sometimes," Roy added. "I could get along real well without her for a while." I looked at Ma quickly, afraid that she might decide to send me away so Roy could try it out. But she was giving him a disapproving look, and he bowed his head for prayer. Pa prayed as usual for the Lord to bless the food and the hands that prepared it. It occurred to me that I hadn't helped, so the blessing was not for me. "What are you planning to do with your afternoon?"
Pa asked as he began to eat.
"I don't know exactly, but I'll have fun,"
I added quickly. After dinner, I wandered out to the porch and sat on the edge, swinging my feet. The rattle of dishes reminded me that mine would probably not be done unless I took care of it. When Ma finished and left the kitchen, I crept to the door to look. Sure enough, there was my cup and plate. The rest of the table was cleared.
"That's not fair,"
I thought.
"Ma did the boys' dishes. She could have done mine, too."
"And you could have helped her," a little voice inside me said. "She did the boys' dishes because they are out in the field working." As quietly as I could, I rinsed off my dishes and brushed the crumbs from the table. I felt ashamed that I was the only one in the family who hadn't done anything all day. Even our dog Pep had taken the cows to the field that morning. Slowly, I walked to my room to think things over. The unmade bed and the clothes on the floor looked worse than they had when I left them. I picked up my clothes and made the bed, then sat down on the edge and looked around the room. Why had I thought that having no chores to do would be so wonderful? How had I planned to spend the time? I picked up a mail-order catalog and flipped over a few pages, then put it down. Emily sat in the chair watching me, her sober, shoe-buttoned doll eyes inviting me to play. But I didn't feel like it. The clock in the parlor struck. Only 1 hour had passed since dinner time. I sighed and walked to the window. Ma was in the garden picking vegetables for supper. Maybe she would let me help her get them ready.
"Ma, I'm tired of being a lady of independence. Could I shell the peas for you?"
"Are you sure you want to? What about your day off?"
"I think I've had enough of it. I can't think of anything I want to do."
"You've found out something important today," Ma said. It often happens that if you don't do anything, there's nothing you want to do. That's a pretty sad way to live.
I agreed with Ma, and I didn't try that again. Grandma looked at me and her eyes twinkled. Do you think you'd like to try it? I shook my head. I don't think so. I guess it's nicer to have something to do. End of chapter 9.